Welcome to Impact the World, the show for and about creatives, changemakers, and entrepreneurs. This is a conversation episode where a special guest shares with me what they are creating and the behind-the-scenes journey of their experience. Hi, welcome to this episode of Impact the World, where I'm thrilled to be with Kim Skipper Corbin, who I came to know through her work as senior publicist and social media manager for New World Library, who published my book, Energy Speaks, in 2019. But the more I came to know Kim and her wonderful, bubbly personality, the more I realized there was more to the story. And the story goes that Kim started a movement which is all detailed at her website, iskip.com, 20 years ago in 1999. And so I said to Kim, this is a fascinating story, it's a fascinating topic, and you have had the typical creator's journey of ups and downs with this mission of yours. So I asked her to come onto the show and talk to me about it. So Kim, thank you for being here.
And thanks for having me.
So skipping, now I did what you told me is the classic thing when we first started talking about it, because you were explaining to me that you started this skipping movement, and I did what you said the BBC had done. Coming from England, I was assuming you meant jump rope.
Yes.
And that you had people all over the world doing jump rope, but I was quite delighted to learn, no, not that skipping at all. You mean literally the childhood playground skipping.
Yes. Yeah, like skipping down the yellow brick road.
Yeah. So before you kind of turned this into a thing for the rest of the world, what was your relationship to skipping? Was it something you'd done all your life?
No, I actually hadn't skipped since I was a kid until 1997, so 2 years before I actually started the skipping movement. And I was out with a couple of friends, and one of them said, "Let's skip." And he went skipping down the street in front of us. And as I followed, I was so filled with joy. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. This has got to be great exercise. I bet I could get my Burning Man friends to skip with me and organize some skipping events. And then the Chronicle could do a story about it, and it would go out on the wire, and it could start a skipping fitness movement. And I had the whole vision, and I wasn't quite ready to implement it yet. I actually tried to recruit a friend of mine to be the skipper, and I would be her publicist.
Oh, okay.
Like, I just wasn't ready to say yes yet. And then 2 years later, through another series of amazing synchronicities, I started skipping again. Basically, a coworker, I had tried to go for a run one morning. I'm never going to be a runner. I dislike running immensely. And I had tried to go for a run, and I was telling her just what a frustrating experience it was. And in that same kind of check-in, she told me a story about her 4-year-old daughter taking her by the hand at the mall and saying, "Come on, Mommy, let's skip." And she said, and I did it, but I thought, well, this is weird because adults don't skip. And that was the light bulb went off the second time, and it was right when the .com world was getting going. My brother helped me build iskip.com. I started organizing happy hour skipping events in San Francisco. The Chronicle found out about it. It went out on the wire, and before I knew it, I was on the BBC in London, and People Magazine, Time Magazine, all the fitness magazines were calling me, and I was off and skipping, and this amazing, I had found my calling, and I was willing to follow it anywhere.
Amazing. So I have a question about the vision, because you said I had this vision, and the whole thing kind of downloaded for you. Was that in that moment of just skipping and following your friend down the street? Was it like an epiphany?
Yes. The 2 years before I actually did it, it was an epiphany. And I could see the whole vision of starting a movement, not even me skipping down the street. So then when it came time 2 years later to actually do it, I was like, okay, that means I got to go out tomorrow and skip down the street by myself. Can I do that? And that was an interesting experience. I wasn't so sure.
So what was it like when you did it? Like what were perhaps the reservations that came up for you when you did that?
Well, it's what most people think. It's like, adults don't skip, but people are going to think I'm crazy.
Totally.
And really that's an ingrained thing in all of us, which I find so fascinating, because most of us did skip as kids. And it's something along with our wonder and our imagination and our creativity that as we get more serious and become adults, and we lose sight of that. And skipping's a great metaphor, if nothing else, for that childlike joy, but it also brings it out in your body too.
Totally. And it's funny because we both are long-term students and people who work in the field of consciousness, spirituality, and it's just a well-known truth that the more we retain the childlike innocence, the childlike qualities, our spirituality flows far more readily and easily. And I also think it's funny, isn't it, how we think things like that are crazy, and yet there are some seriously crazy things in the adult world that we haven't questioned or don't think to question.
Yes.
So what was it like when it started to explode? Because it kind of happened quite quickly, didn't it? 1999, you launched the whole thing. And what was the trajectory of you launching this vision into the world and suddenly all of these newspapers and TV channels wanting in on it? What was the trajectory, the timeline?
It happened really fast. It was probably, I think, June of '99 is when the Chronicle article happened. And then that next 6 months, it was just amazing. There was no social media yet. And so what ended up happening was I had this idea that I thought was really going to be new to adults, but actually there was hundreds of people all over the country who'd been skipping for years, much longer than me. And so they started coming forward and saying, hey, I do this too. And I realized that rather than having this be my thing, people would say, oh, you better trademark it. You better trademark iSkip. You better protect your idea. You know, that's also a conventional wisdom thing about creativity and your creative ideas. And I realized when I had met all these people who were skipping way longer than I am, that it was going to be more of a collaborative effort, and I wanted it to be a movement. And so I started recruiting head skippers, and there was like 60 cities where someone was the head skipper. And so all of that happened over, I'd say, like 6 months to a year. Was really just an amazing amount of publicity and exposure. And it was because the internet was just getting going and people were all focused on trying to make a lot of money. Yeah. And I was like, this is about sharing a positive message with the world. You know, I was fresh off my first Burning Man. And so I just really was like, that's what this is. Like, this is what the world needs more. And that was part of the reason that people did the story too.
Were there any tricky sides to that sudden success? Because I mean, it sounds amazing, right? You have this very holistic, positive impact vision, and lo and behold, very quickly it takes off. So were there any challenges with the success or the projection?
There were. They came a little later.
Right.
Because I was able, it was like my body and my spirit were united in such a way that they had never been united before. And just skipping through life. It was just amazing. But at the same time, I was doing the classic spiritual bypassing thing without realizing it, because yes, the inner child has all of our joys and our play and our fun and our creativity and all those positive things, but it's also the part of us that is wounded and hurt and has fears and insecurities. Well, I didn't pay any attention to that at first. And so I just thought that I had found my calling and I was going to have this straight shot upward and that life was just going to be grand from then on out. And that's not actually how it went, because I had some, I still had insecurities and fear that I wasn't looking at. And it eventually, in the form of a panic attack while I was giving a talk one morning to some Ohio salespeople, I decided I was going to sing, "Oh, what a beautiful morning." And they all just looked at me like I was insane. And I had a panic attack and all those fears finally came out. So it took a while. I mean, there was a long run there where I was just skipping on sunshine.
Yeah.
But the long tail of the story was there's a lot that I needed to look at and heal and not just skip past.
So in terms of your life story, in a way, this is me from the outside, just, kind of looking at it. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like any aspect of you that felt like you were different or an outsider was suddenly able to kind of boldly put that out into the world and be embraced. But of course, the other side of that is, and the reason that we often don't put ourselves out into the world is the part of us that we all have that's insecure. Am I good enough? What are people going to think? So it's interesting that panic attack culminated for you while you're singing, and a load of people are kind of looking at you going, "Oh, she's crazy," or "This is crazy." And
that was at the very end. I had, I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but I eventually quit my job. My dad would say, "Kim, how does the cash register ring?" this skipping, and I'd say, Dad, skipping is free. I found my calling.
Right.
If I leap, the net will follow. So I left, and I basically skipped myself into financial ruin. And that panic attack happened right as I realized that the book I was writing wasn't going to get sold, and like it was starting to kind of crumble. And then as it did, all of those things that I'd been skipping past kind of rushed to the surface and needed my attention.
All these things that you've been skipping past. See, it's great. It's funny how the language is great. But I'm curious, so financial ruin. So first of all, we're just going to back up a little bit, because I kind of got the gist, but what you were doing was organizing like group skipping events in cities. There would be a skip leader, and it would say, hey, meet here, and we're going to skip for a set amount of time. Is that how it worked?
Well, I was mostly doing it locally. In addition to doing freelance publicity work, I was also thinking that this book that I had an agent from when I was in People magazine, an agent in New York contacted me, and so that was what I thought that the revenue model was going to be. But the skipping events were happy hour skips in San Francisco and Sunday skips in the park, and I'd come to different cities sometimes, but they were never financially lucrative, because skipping is free, as it should be.
Right, of course. You can't
and I would always tell my dad that. I'd say, no, I'm not. He'd say, you need to do a membership model. You need to, because my dad's a business guy. And I would say, nope, that's not it. That doesn't feel right. Like, skipping is free. He said, well, I've never been in People magazine. I just am going to watch this unfold. And eventually the rubber met the road, and I had to go back to like a regular job and that sort of thing.
So were you investing your money to kind of make a lot of this happen?
I was living off my credit cards. That's where the financial ruin part came in.
Right. And was there any, because it's a tricky thing, money, because we know that money is a very tricky area and brings up a lot of stuff for all of us. But it's also true that if you are building something and putting it into the world, unless you are completely doing it on a free basis, usually revenue is required to put some of the building blocks. So was anybody ever paying for anything to do with the skipping, or was it just you funding the whole thing?
It was me funding the whole thing.
But with the idea that the book could be...
The book was going to be, which is ironic, because I work in publishing and I should know better, or I should have known better, that authors generally don't live off of their royalty statement. But because it was so much national publicity. I mean, I have never gotten that much publicity for any of my authors. It was so huge, and there was so much momentum that I thought that I was trusting in the divine, which is a slippery slope.
Oh boy,
I stopped really tuning in and listening, and my ego that was loving not having to feel all the insecurities and everything just took over, and eventually there was a reckoning.
Yeah, and I think that is a reckoning that probably most people listening to this show, myself included, many of my contemporaries and friends who do work in a visionary way, learned the hard way. You can't abandon the logic when you're being a visionary. You can push the vision for a way, but at a certain point, logic and certain realistic building blocks that are needed will start to crumble or hit you in the face. So I think we've all had that crash that you're talking about.
And it's hard in those times too, with the money piece. There's a lot of talk about magic happens outside of our comfort zones and that sort of thing. But the Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing is very real. And if you don't have that base of support and safety financially to create from, it becomes a lot more challenging to create.
Yeah, whenever I've worked with entrepreneurs who I've either been mentoring or who've come through any of our programs, I will always advise that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is probably a phrase that I need to update in my brain, right? Because it's pretty gruesome. But yeah, just to not go completely gung ho. Again, I did it in an earlier phase of my life. I think we've all done it, and you learn from it. But that to kind of let the universe meet you as well and show you that things are working, so that you aren't completely stressed and in a rough place while you're trying to build something. So what was that like when it all kind of collapsed? So you've been living through the divine vision. Everything's been going really well.
For a long time.
For a long time. So yeah, there's that lovely security that's set in. And tell us about the book. So What was the book going to be, first of all?
The book was basically, I thought, just my story. You know, just the story of me finding my unique calling, and it was more memoir-ish. And when I look back at what I was writing then, now, I'm like, thank goodness. Well, I didn't even have the whole book. I just had the proposal I was trying to sell. And I'm so glad it didn't sell, because I hadn't even gone through, I was just at the honeymoon phase of the hero's journey. You know, like I didn't even realize that the dark night of the soul was coming, and that it's part of the creative process. And until I landed at New World Library and I started working on Joseph Campbell books and Bill Plotkin's books and reading all of this literature that's out there that's about that reckoning and coming to terms with it and integrating everything with the fun awakening piece of it.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize it then.
So the book couldn't sell. So what did you do then? Like what happened?
I can remember my parents actually right before it did, when we were waiting to hear back from the agent, from my agent, and they said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "That's not going to happen." I mean, I really thought it wasn't going to happen. And then it didn't happen, and I went back and I started looking for work, and it was not only had I failed, I had failed very publicly, because I had been, you know, new social media, putting it all out there to the world. So it was pretty tough. I got a job working for an 80-year-old bodybuilder who had reversed his heart disease by lifting weights. And he also was like probably shooting steroids in the bathroom. It was an interesting comeback job. But when I went to work for him, it was health related enough where I could be like, okay, you know, maybe this is just the next phase. And in that period, I came to realize that my calling wasn't necessarily to do the skipping thing. It was to say yes to whatever life was bringing me, and greet it and with grace, and find my purpose in that. Like I started shifting my internal focus to that. Like, how can I say yes to what's in front of me right now? Obviously, if this is happening, it's here to teach me something. What do I need to learn here? How can I positively impact this situation? And how can I say yes to this? Not just yes to, oh, you want me to skip? Great. Wow. Yes, and be in national media? Sure.
Yeah.
But how do you say yes when you're at a job where you're like, I'm not sure if this is even where I'm supposed to be? And how do I kind of recalibrate and have the same kind of attitude I had about saying yes to skipping about what was showing up then?
It's interesting hearing you say that, because there's a couple of things that kind of pinged for me while I was listening to you, and I think there's this weird societal imprint that we all grew up thinking that, like, if you're on national media, if you're successful, that's like a good thing. But actually, as we often see time and time again, how to deal with and look after yourself in those moments is not really handed out in the manual.
No.
So there is this perception of, oh, well, this level of outer success is happening, so surely I should be happy, taken care of, all of that stuff. It's almost kind of written into our society that's kind of what we should aspire to. But I wonder for you too, because I think this was true for me and people I've worked with and met over the years. Do you think that some of the heartbreak was that in a way you were proving to people like your parents and other people in your world, spirituality works? Look, it's like if you follow the divine, it's like, because I definitely had that in my early 20s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I really feel like fame is one of the most dangerous drugs that there is.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to lose sight of things just when you're in the throes of that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of bad stuff happen to people who are very kind of well-known.
Yeah.
And not just the stuff that we learn publicly, but just a little bit up close, how it distorts your perception. And I think it's success or fame have to be held very lightly, because both of them will move and shift and go away. And they also can be, the shadow sides of those things are quite precarious too.
Definitely.
So you found your way into publicizing again, and was publicity just something that you'd always had a passion for, or a kind of a knack for?
Yeah, I think it's also one of my callings, and I love now that I have that calling and that I'm living that, and skipping gets to be, it's free, wonderful, doesn't have to support me self. You know, like that both of those exist. And after the bodybuilder, well, actually, I started getting fired from a lot of jobs. The bodybuilder fired me. We kind of clashed a lot. And then he fired me like one day when I was getting ready to go home for Christmas break. He just called me in his office with a little Santa hat on and said, "You're fired."
While he was
yeah. And then I
Merry
worked
Christmas.
at a Curves for Women, for a little while. And then the owner there thought, because I'd had all this publicity, that I thought I was this hot shot and I was just trying to make ends meet. And she ended up telling the owner that I lacked enough initiative to be a manager of a Curves, which is really funny because there's lots of things you can say about me, but I'm not lacking initiative at all.
Knowing
and my dad was like, "What's going on? My kid keeps getting fired." And then I got a job at the Learning Annex in San Francisco and started booking speaking events and that sort of thing, which is a very stressful job. And then the New World Library job opened up. And when it did, it felt like, okay, now this, not only I don't have to struggle to say yes to this. Like, this seems like, it's not a publicity director position, which I had before, but it's a way that I can be focusing on the skipping movement and my own project and have some creative space. And then I got back into publicizing.
So for those who don't know New World Library, how would you sum up New World Library as a publishing house?
New World Library is an amazing place to work. It was founded by Shakti Gawain and Mark Allen 40 years ago, when Shakti wrote Creative Visualization. They really walk their talk as far as supporting their employees, the community. Every year, at the end of the year, each employee gets a certain amount of our profits to donate to a nonprofit of our choice. I mean, it is just an incredible company that has been helping to shift consciousness on the planet for 40 years. And really is people don't leave once they get there. We love working there so much.
Yeah, it was interesting. So when we were in the proposal stage for my book, we kind of had interactions with several different publishing houses, and the feeling that we had with you guys has just been consistently, ever since we were with you, just there is a family and a warmth energy that is really important to me and my team whenever we're collaborating with anybody, and yet you don't see it very often out there. So it was kind of really nice to feel that. And then, of course, the caliber of the books that you guys have published. So that's how we first met. And I remember getting the email from you, and the sign-off was Kim Skipper Corbin, and I just thought that was your middle name. I was like, oh, interesting. Being a Brit,
it's my secret identity. Sometimes I'm like, I'm a book publicist by day and a skipping superhero by night.
Yeah. So you're now in the position of helping support the messages and the work of these many books, many authors. You were amazing with me. You've never done so many interviews in my life. But what does that give you? What would you say is kind of like I'll put it this way, what's the most surprising takeaway for you in being a publicist for New World Library?
I think the way that I've been guided and have learned through the authors that I work with, and how the right book shows up for me at the right time about the different things that I personally need to learn. Like, there's synchronicity happening there all the time. I hosted a podcast for New World for a while, and it felt like a graduate level course in this stuff. And like I said, I hadn't even considered the fact that this dark night of the soul that I was going through was actually a regular part of doing anything that has meaning, it's something that comes up in the creative process, and it was normal, And so when I landed there and I started working with Bill Plotkin, and actually Bill Plotkin, who wrote Soulcraft and Nature and the Human Soul, he was the head skipper in Durango, Colorado, when I was doing the skipping movement. So there was these wonderful threads, but I think that just the way that my own consciousness journey and spiritual understanding and presence and way of showing up in the world has been transformed as a result of being there and realizing that really it's not just about putting these ideas out into the world. It's like we have to take them out of our heads and really integrate them into our lives and bodies. And that's really important to me. And it's been, since the skipping movement, that's been what's important to me. And the way that New World Library has facilitated that is probably what has surprised and delighted me the most.
That's great. And it's interesting because I'm wondering, 12 years you've been with New World, right? 14, sorry. Yeah. So a lot has changed in 14 years. What have you noticed that's different in the field of consciousness, coming at it from your position in the publishing world? What have you noticed in the last 14 years, the shift?
Well, I feel like right now, and this is what I love about you and your community and your work. It's about coming together and doing and collaborating, more of a collaborative model, but doing it in community and supporting each other in that way and having that show up in our lives. Like, I feel like that's just recently, like, that's really shifted. Well, with what's going on in the world, it's becoming even more important. And how do we not just understand the ideas? Like, when I first read The Power of Now in the late 90s, and I was like, oh, watching The Thinker, I can do that. You know, oh, I got this. You know, I just really thought I had it all figured out. But what does it look like when to really meditate and to live your life that way?
And The Power of Now is, to this day, one of the biggest books you've ever published.
Oh, by far.
Yeah.
Power
of Now, spiritual classic. What would your kind of three favorite, or what three spiritual books come to mind for you right now as powerful, huge game changers for you?
The first one was The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. That was in my mid-20s, and it set the pathway for this way of life of always wanting to evolve and grow. And it was completely mind-blowing. And then Succulent Wild Love by Sark, who New World Library has since published, or Succulent Wild Woman, which I read in the late 90s, which was just like this, really woke up my creative self that then I later found again at Burning Man. But that kind of like, Kim, Succulent Wild Woman. And then New World Library ended up publishing Succulent Wild Love and Glad No Matter What by Susan Sark. So that one for sure. The Artist's Way, and The Power of Now, of course. I always come back to Eckhart.
Yeah, of course. So I'm curious because, you know, we were talking about skipping earlier, and I feel like I didn't actually ask you enough about the benefits of skipping, which when I went to your website and looked at what are the benefits for us? I mean, it's kind of obvious, I know, but it was interesting when I was reading about it. It kind of hit me. It's like, oh yeah, why aren't we more aware of this? So what would you share with us about that?
Well, it lifts your heart rate and your spirits physically, and it was funny that when the media would interview me, that's all that they really wanted to hear about.
The heart rate or the spirits?
Not the physical. You know, like, well, how many calories does it burn, and how, you know, like, that's really which isn't really my favorite part of it at all, but it's pretty impressive. There was just a study that was done at East Carolina University that found that they're skipping as fast as they're running, but if you do that, you burn more calories skipping than running. For me, I am not a long distance skipper. I think that the judge of a good skip is how much fun you have from point A to point B. So even if you only go for 10 feet and you have a lot of fun, that's what it's all about for me. It's about lifting your vibration and lifting your spirit. I think of it as a dessert exercise. Like, at the end of my workout at the gym, I put on a song that makes me really happy when there's no one in the workout room, and I just skip around and leap and play. Skipping is like an animal frolicking in the field.
Yeah.
And running is fight or flight. You run to get away from things, or like, you know, it has this edge to it. And skipping is so playful. It's really fun to do on the treadmill at the gym. So you have serious runners on either side and just have your headphones on and just like, wee. And when I do that, I'll just do a fast walking pace and then blend and skip slowly. It's not something that beginning skippers should do because it takes a little skill to start slowly.
So no lawsuits after this interview. Yeah.
And my favorite part of it is really just the freedom. And even to this day, like, I've been skipping for 20 years. I've had this whole like skipping life. And even I have that voice of caution still comes up sometimes and says, like, if I'm going to skip down a busy street, you can't skip. Oh, don't do it. Don't skip here. People are going to annoy people with your joy. People are going to look at you funny. Like, this still happens after all these years. But the voice of my heart loves to skip. And as soon as I skip, it's alive and it's present and it's there. And so over the years, I've learned to choose that. It's like a conscious choice to choose the creative voice of spirit over the voice of caution that's saying, oh, you better not do this. And then that translates into other areas of my life as well. When I sit down to write, it's like, you've been trying to write this book for 20 years. I don't think you should even bother. If I can recognize, oh, that's that same voice of caution that's trying to protect my inner child from getting hurt again. But actually, when I'm engaged in the creative process and my hands skipping across the page and I'm connecting with this work, that brings me great joy. And if I can choose that consciously, skipping has helped me because of the very immediate dialogue that happens each time to recognize those voices and to be able to make a more empowered choice.
And that is such a metaphor for the whole of living in the creative process, what you've just shared right there, knowing that you're pushing against an edge, but choosing to continue to push against an edge rather than let the edge push you back down and stop you skipping or writing or giving a public speech or whatever it is that's coming up for you. And I love that you bring up, because earlier we talked about people thinking you're crazy, which, is the default for anything that we see that's different. So I was having this lovely visual of you at the gym, skipping in the middle of the treadmills. And what I like about that is it breaks us into reality, into the present, because, you're walking past people running on a treadmill and you don't think twice if you see all these people running. But if there's one in the middle skipping, it's going to, kind of wake us up, shake us up.
Yes.
But I love that you talked about too much joy, because I think that's a real trigger that we don't really talk about enough. I think it does annoy people if you are too joyous, too friendly. I mean, it's one thing if you're overbearing and imposing on someone else, but I always find it interesting that the presence of someone else's joy in the room can make someone else react without checking, oh, I'm having a reaction, what's underneath this for me, rather than assuming they should just castigate or chastise that person who looks happy in the room. It's actually a good clue for you if you're having that reaction, but too often we see it leading people to try and quash that person. Yeah,
and how much does it hold us back in so many moments of that dynamic that's there?
Yeah. So I'm curious, because I think there are so many different ways that we can bring enlightenment to our life. For one person, it might be the skipping. For another person, it might be something they do that's more metaphysical in nature or physical exercise. What kind of things were you hearing from people inside your skipping? I won't call it your skipping movement, but, when you were organizing these things, what kind of stories did you hear people sharing about what it was doing for them?
There was a lot of people that it gave permission to, like that they thought, okay, if other people are doing this, it's okay for me to do it. And then that gave them the courage. If it's a community that's doing this and I'm part of a community, then I can do it as well. There were some people that called themselves closet skippers, who like to do it, but they don't necessarily want to show other people.
So what, they're doing it like privately at home?
Yeah. Not everyone has to be skipping down the street in public. You can just skip around your house, and you can't help but smile when you skip. Like, it's an immediate vibration and energy lifter. It's such a fun movement. And I like to challenge people to skip at least 10 steps after they hear this interview, just like down the hall at work. And it's even more fun if you take someone by the hand, or especially a kid in your life. If we can let kids know that we actually have so much to learn from them, and say, hey, I haven't skipped for a long time, will you show me how again? And take them by the hand and have that experience with them. It's just really rewarding, and it helps them see that we have a lot to learn from them as well.
Yeah, and also that adults might be a bit more fun than they thought as well. It's kind of a twofold.
I have a friend who teaches roller skating, and they just recently, she was working with adults and kids, and she said the kids are so great, but the adults they've forgotten how to just play and be kids.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to lose sight of that with everything that's going on in the world, but I feel like it's even more important now than ever that we enjoy life and realize that's what we're here for.
Definitely.
That's the purpose of all of this.
Definitely. So this show is both audio and video. So a lot of people will just be listening. But before we finish the show, we are going to get on our feet, and you're going to do a little skipping demo. So if you're watching, you'll be able to see it, and we can kind of hopefully encourage some other people to do it too. But before we do come to a little demo of the skipping, what's next for you? and your work in skipping, because I know that it's kind of coming back. You're having a little bit of a skip revival at the moment.
Yeah, I am ready to get back in the arena of writing my book again. And it's something, talk about a long journey and something that's been challenging and that sort of thing. Like, I'm really ready to write about my experience in a way that will hopefully help other people with whatever their unique calling is. Like, I love that I was called to skip. Like, it's my calling, it's mine to do in this world. I've been doing it for 20 years and I love it. And if that's my thing, like, who knows what somebody else's thing might be. So I had a friend, or I met a new friend, and we were talking all about my experience. And she said, well, you have to write this book, because that's what the only thing we can do as heroes that have gone through this journey is to leave breadcrumbs for other people along the way of what we learned. And that's really the intention that I want to get back to writing from. Not in the early days when I was writing the book that I thought was going to make me become my livelihood. I thought I was going to be this motivational speaker, and I was going to be, like more of a traditional type of self-help person. And that's not necessarily where I'm coming from now. Like, I feel like we're all equal people on this journey of consciousness together, and it's not a hierarchy, and that I want to just write from my personal experience in a way that will hopefully help other people with their experience.
Well, that's what's so interesting. We've been focusing what we've talked about really on your topic area, I guess, but that's the only real differentiator in this whole conversation. Like, we could be talking about anything. We could be talking about your passion in any area, and the breadcrumbs, the nuggets of wisdom that you share, that you have learned and experienced along the way. That's really what Impact the World is about. It's hopefully to inspire other creators, creatives, to put their thing out into the world, because God knows there's so many things that any of us who do this work in the world, whether you do it on a public scale on the internet or whether it's something you do in your community, we all go through the same fears and doubts. And if there were certain things we could have, completely. Yeah. I always think if there were certain things we'd known, it would have saved us time. However, I also think no regrets, because it's like that's how we learn. Yeah. But it's a fascinating journey.
Yes.
So you have iskip.com. So that's the website that I could go to and join your newsletter if I wanted to follow what you're doing and stay in touch with the skipping movement that you're behind. And I believe there is going to be a celebration in Austin, Texas next year.
Yes, it'll be the 5th annual Austin Skip Fest. Wow. It was called the Austin Skipathon, and this is kind of the magic of skipping. Like, 4 years ago, I got a call out of the blue. Nothing had happened for a little while in the skipping movement, and they said, we've planned this whole event in Austin. We have all these sponsors, and we realized that we don't have anyone to lead the event, to lead the skip. And so we thought, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a skipping expert out there? We Googled, we found you. And it's just been a match made in heaven. It benefits foster kids, foster angels of Central Texas. This will be our 5th year in 2020, and hundreds of people all skipping together. It's the largest scale skipping event that I've ever been a part of. So it's really exciting, and it's for a really good cause.
That's fantastic. That's next summer. So that would be summer 2020.
Yeah, it's usually around late August. We just don't have the dates for it.
Okay, so yet. I can probably find, by the time we publish this show, it will be 2020. So yes. iskip.com is where those details will be. And the book, you're going to basically focus it really on your creative hero's journey in a way.
Yeah, I'm gonna, the working title is Skipping the Life Fantastic. And then I'm imagining it to be 10 things I learned about joy, fear, and resilience by inviting the world to skip. Is the working title.
Beautiful. And you've spent 14 years working on other people, helping other people's books get out into the world. So I'm curious, because you have a real inside take on a world that many people want to get into. I know I've met many people who want to write their book or publish their book, whether it's self-published or not. What advice would you give an aspiring first-time author that what do they need to feel about themselves and what they're creating based on your experience?
Well, what do you mean what they need to feel?
Well, twofold. Because obviously there's the advice of what makes a good first-time book and what are publishing houses or audiences looking for, which is always a tricky question, because I also feel that sometimes your calling is enough to kind of put your thing into the world. But what advice would you give someone who's listening to this and wants to write a book, but perhaps is a little on the fence or a little nervous? Given all your time in publishing, I'm just curious if there's any
What I've with my own writing project that I've been struggling to get back at it, what I've been remembering lately is advice that Shakti Gawain gave me, which is when she wrote Creative Visualization, she wasn't writing it for other people, she wrote for herself first. And I think that that's just as far as starting to get everything down, like writing from that place when you first begin is important. And then I think having community around you as well, because so much of publishing these days is when a book comes out is having a platform, is what they say in publishing, and having connections and community, but finding a way to kind of be gathering people around you to support that for when the project eventually comes out is important as well.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you. So we are going to do a little bit of skipping.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move our chairs back here.
Okay.
And if you are listening, I invite you to follow along with the listening instructions here.
So the first thing when you skip as an adult is it's really easy to go super high and like be really enthusiastic, and you'll exhaust yourself really fast. So you want to just kind of like skip low to the ground. Very like...
It's kind of funny when you do it without moving. I'm kind of like doing a
You
little
have to do step hop, step hop.
Step hop, step hop. See? Don't worry if you're not doing it right.
Yeah, it's true. That's the other thing is like you can't do it wrong.
I'm only used to doing it with traveling. This is like on the spot skipping. This is good. And the arms are good, very good.
That's good. And then another good thing to do to conserve your energy is to do like walk to, skip to.
Okay.
So you can do walk to, skip to, walk to, skip to.
And along here, so that everybody could come this way with your demo. That's a good point. Yes, you are on a leash. That's great. And so how long would you do this for every day, Kim? Like, if you do this at home, like 5-10 minutes?
Well, I do one song in the workout room. Like that's definitely my thing. Also, when I'm out in my neighborhood walking around, I'll play games. Like I'll say, every time I go past a picket fence, I'm gonna skip.
Awesome.
So I'm not necessarily skipping the whole time, but I'm blending it in where I can and where I'm inspired to.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been awesome, and can't wait to see where you go next. And thank you for sharing so much of your journey.
Thank you. Skip on.
You have been listening to Impact the World. For more of my work, please visit leeharrisenergy.com. If you are an entrepreneur, creative, healer, or change maker who wants to take your work to the next level in the world, consider joining my Own Your Value online course. Online video and audio plus live calls with me, beginning May 26th, and registration closes on June 7th. Visit leeharrisenergy.com or use the links below this video or audio.